This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses.
Seeing some comments from folks like Joe Bonamassa, Tim Henson even from Polyphia, and listening to Corey Wong's podcast and listening to folks like John Mayer and talking about gear and this sort of thing. And I wanted to kind of reflect on some of the things that I've learned as someone who has bought and sold a lot of gear. Now, I think that number must be in around sort of the hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of thing, rather than less than that, because I think last time that I looked at it, I had done like a big sell-off of a bunch of gear and had sold off over sort of like £40,000 worth of stuff, whether that was pedals, amps, guitars, stuff that I just accrued over the years. Now, I think gas is something that many of us kind of have issues with, particularly after eating rhubarb. Particularly in the guitar world, because these things don't take up loads of space, and these things take up even less space. And we see videos on YouTube of folks kind of, demoing this stuff, and I think it's very easy, particularly if it's kind of in the disposable income kind of range, to think, right, I want to try one of these things. Now, I did recently also have a conversation with a company. One of the things that sort of put me off during that conversation, someone in it said, we're thinking that audiences got bored of people playing the same gear. And that puts me off, because what it means is that for me, you'd be bored of me playing my favourite Strat. And I think I kind of resist that, because I think a lot of my favourite players, I identify maybe one guitar with them, like Jonathan Kreisberg it's that one ES175. You know, if it's Gary Moore, it's the Les Paul. There are actually two, like the Stripe or Greenie. If it's Eric Johnson, it's probably going to be the Virginia Strat, right? If it's Steve Vai, it's the Gem. And then, you know, these things change a little bit over time, but, or Philip Sace even, it might be that mother Strat of his. But I kind of, the idea of someone who's got millions of guitars and is never really bonding with one, to me that doesn't seem as romantic as, you know, having that one guitar which is kind of more your tool, if you like. When you think of these as tools and you think about, you know, people might have their favourite knife, people might have their favourite lawnmower, people might have their favourite drill. If you were switching up your tools all of the time, that kind of takes energy and it kind of takes time to kind of reconnect with that thing each time. You know, if I switch between a Les Paul and a Strat, there's a little bit of a, you know, these can be things that we want as well, but there is definitely like a difference there and you might not necessarily connect with it exactly the same. So the idea of just to keep it interesting for people always having to necessarily switch guitars, to me, I'm a little bit resistant to. I do like to review guitars and that sort of thing, but always I think you'll probably see this popping up as a baseline, and I'm not going to be shy about saying that this is my favourite Strat, if you get what I mean. I hope that's okay with you as well. When I heard someone say that, I kind of thought, well, yeah, I don't really want to go down that route so much. You can only have really one number one guitar, and that's something to bear in mind as well. I've got other Strats and stuff like that, and even other K-lines, and I still come back to this one more, and so therefore I think that some of the money that I might have tied up in these other Strats, probably I don't necessarily need to have.
This is John from the future. Also, the more expensive guitars that I've got have not always been the ones that I connected with most. In fact, that has actually been the case, that generally if it feels like it's a bargain, I've connected with that better than the more expensive stuff. I did do a video on that as well if you want to check it out, but always thinking that a better guitar would necessarily be expensive is proven to me to not really be true. And then that's another thing that I see on like forums and stuff. People say, well, if you buy a cheaper guitar, you'll always be wondering, you know, what that next more expensive thing would have been like, so you might as well buy the expensive one first off. That's also not really been true for me, particularly like with the PRS DGT versus the PRS DGT SE. Sometimes the cheap guitar suits you better. Sometimes you don't want to have that much tied up in one guitar. Maybe, I don't know.
Be careful, I think, when it comes to buying amplifiers, because this can be quite an addictive rabbit hole if you've got the money to do this, and you can get kind of tied up on this idea. So I, for a while, kind of was really, really into Mesa Boogie amplifiers, and I thought, well, they're all a little bit different, right? And you think, well, this one's kind of single channel, this one supposedly has the best clean on a Mesa Boogie ever, this one's got whatever, all the bells and whistles. But actually, when you do kind of tests through the same cabinet and all of this sort of stuff, even a Marshall and a Mesa Boogie, they don't sound that dissimilar when you crank the gain up on them. Another thing that I've heard Joe Bonamassa talk about is that basically with any amp, he always ends up twisting the knobs and basically sounding roughly the same. And I was going through earlier a clip, and I found a clip of me playing Jake's Murphy Lab into a Fender Vibreverb, and I had the JHS Bob, and it still basically sounds like me, I think, doesn't it? It figures to me that pretty much as long as the amps can do the things that you need, 1, 2, 3 amps is probably just as beneficial as having like 15. Probably you're going to spend a lot of your time on one. I don't know of too many people that switch amps out per gig, and this is a kind of another thing. Like, it's good to have a consistent rig, I think. Most other musicians have this. You know, if you're a keyboard player, you'd have a consistent kind of rig. If you're a drummer, generally drum with 1 or 2 kits maybe. And I think it helps you to make that connection with your gear, so that it's no longer like you're trying to figure out how the gear works, and it's more like, how am I going to make music now with it? The next piece of gear doesn't always necessarily improve your musical life in any way. Sometimes it can give us like a temporary kind of hit of like, oh, this thing's really cool. And I guess that can be important for like little bits of inspiration here and there. What I've found, and I was reading this just like kind of about Tim Henson, they had been using Pod Farm, which is a VST, for ages for their kind of recordings and I think their early albums even. And they saved up all the money that they had and bought an Axe-Fx between the two of them. And they initially didn't really get good results from it because they, for whatever reason, were kind of building presets and finding that it wasn't working out so well for them. And so there is potentially an opportunity cost each time you buy a new piece of gear. Not only does it cost you money, but does it cost you time kind of tweaking and all this sort of stuff, versus sticking with what you may already have. If there's not a problem with what you already have, then I think sticking with it can be a really good thing. You know, you might hear from folks that have gone from Kemper to Quad Cortex and gone back because actually they found their older workflow worked for them better. Or you might find people that do make switches and then are pleased with it. But what I've found is that the workflow is the more important thing for me. Like, things have to sort of incorporate into what I do on a daily basis. Otherwise, probably I'm going to revert to something else. So for me, my daily kind of stuff is generally an HX Stomp, or like in the intro here, I also use an FM3 for the clean tone. It's generally going to be a modeler. And I had a conversation with Jake the other day, who's just like, is this why you use a modeler? Because he'd just gone and used the mix wave thing, and he's like, I could record it at any time of night, and it was super easy. Quickest maybe that he'd ever recorded. He didn't have to worry about mics, didn't have to worry about keeping the volume down. Yeah, that's the answer for me. Workflow is kind of key. So you need a guitar that stays in tune, you need gear that works. Beyond that though, I think probably more important is trying to find something you want to do with it. And again, something that changed my workflow or changed my relationship with the guitar for a bit were the Boss Wazza Airs, where I had to, like, a lack of time because of the new baby, and it was like, well, I want to be able to play guitar quickly, so stick those on, charge them up if they are charged, just play some guitar, play along with some of your favourite tunes. I was actually able to play guitar quickly and get some real fun out of playing with Wazza Airs for a time. So things that genuinely change your workflow, I think, can be a benefit. And like for this video, I've not had a MIDI controller in this room for as long as I've been in this room, filming in this room, so a couple of years now. And I went over to my parents and picked that one up, so I had it again. And I think that's just as valid as, or way more valid even, than just inserting another guitar into the fray. Like another instrument could actually open up doors that guitars maybe wouldn't even for you. And I think things like buying a microphone and trying to sing as well can be a thing that could really change your life in an interesting kind of way, that just going through thousands and thousands of pounds of guitar gear doesn't really achieve. The one kind of good thing about guitar gear is that if you're buying second hand, you generally don't tend to lose much money, and so it's possible to go along this journey and buy used bits of gear, sell them on, swap them, and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's a really kind of a cool thing. You can meet some cool people in this way. You might meet your number one guitar, like I did with this one, which was like £850 off of a forum, and you might find some things. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to try out gear, but you don't necessarily want to try and make it the whole focus, because at the end of the day, having lots of guitars in this room is possibly more of a hindrance in terms of making actual music than if I just had the one piece of gear that is fully integrated into my workflow. Likewise, I think the same sort of thing with plugins and things like that literally fill up your hard drive. I'm going to do a video about the pieces of gear that I really use every day. This is coming up. I need to think about it a bit more. But then kind of going through and sort of decluttering the things that we're not using. So I've got, you know, like loads of plugins that I've never used, potentially loads of plugins that I will never use, plugins that I used to use that I've since then kind of fallen out of love with, or found other things that integrated into my workflow better. I think maybe going through and cleaning up that stuff, you know, decluttering in the digital sense, could also follow with decluttering in the kind of physical sense. Let me know your thoughts on some of that. That's kind of what I've come to the place now of realizing that buying new guitars or buying new amps probably aren't going to change anything about what I do. except for have like a guitar that I can talk about for a bit. But in terms of actually sitting down and playing the guitar, I've got all I need, so just get on with it.